Welcome back to STUNT Book Club. Sorry for the lapse in time between me reading to you, but duty calls. All right, we are back to Andy Armstrong's book. We're starting back with chapter 11, Understand the History of Action in Cinema. To really study any art form, it's important to understand how that art developed. Some great and wonderfully bright and skilled people paved the way for you in early movies, so understand how and why they did things. It will help you devise even newer ways of continuing and hopefully improving the profession yourself. What was particularly impressive about some action in another film that you saw? If it impressed you, rewatch it and work out how you think it was done and why it impressed you. See if you can find out more about how and why it was done the way it was. Find out who had the bright idea that impressed you. Research and study is important in the stunt and action professions. And if the movie that impressed you has not been watched for you by several years, make sure to relook at it before you pitch it as reference points. Movies have a habit of seeming far better in hindsight, so that great action sequence you remember might not be nearly as impressive now as you remember it being. This fact is especially true of movies which meant a lot to you as a kid and have not been watched since. It's not fun to suggest something from a great old movie of your memories, only to discover that it has not aged well at all and is in fact pretty hokey. In fact, something as innocent as this can cause people to lose faith in your general judgment and taste of action sequences that you are suggesting, so do not suggest ideas unless you know they are solid ones that will work. Photo. The Amazing Spiderman 2, William Spencer doubling Spider-Man in New York. This stunt is one which was inspired by, if not an exact copy of, one of my all-time heroes, Buster Keaton. So much that when I wanted to do this with Spider-Man, I studied the shot that Buster Keaton did over and over again. At first I thought about all kinds of ways to emulate it using modern technology and equipment that was never available to Buster Keaton, but eventually I decided that why try and improve upon something so beautifully real? I studied the way I felt Buster had engineered the stunt and then replicated it in the most authentic way I could. The trick was to truly study what went into the original Buster Keaton shot. Once I had really fully understood just how he, Buster Keaton, achieved the stunt, I went about having William Spencer, the Spider-Man stunt double, replicate it. To truly study just what I thought Buster Keaton did, I searched all over the internet to find any different angles of the shot. I could not find any different camera positions, but what I did find was one clip which perhaps a half dozen frames longer than others. This told me just what the mechanism of the stunt really was. It was all about body language and the way he disguised what he was really doing. Once I knew this, I was armed to set the stunt up. Photos. Buster Keaton performing the stunt which inspired the one in Spider-Man. Additional photo. It's a small and perhaps seemingly inconsequential stunt, but it was important as a cool demonstration of Spider-Man's effortless, seemingly casual style, and it's an extremely important stunt to illustrate the process of truly studying and understanding action. It's also one of the seemingly easy but pure little stunts of which I am extremely proud. Chapter 12, Working Internationally. Well, let's practice a dialect then, shall we? Chapter 12, Working Internationally. There's something that's becoming more commonplace for American-based stunt coordinators and action unit directors than it used to be. I started my career in England, which is where a lot of the crews were traditionally from on many if not most of the big action movies all through the 70s and 80s and the early half of the 90s. I was incredibly fortunate and have worked in 44 countries on 6 of the world's 7 continents. Many of these countries I have travelled to and worked in several times. I love travelling and always felt amazingly fortunate to have those international adventures. This used to be one of the great perks of being part of the British movie industry. However, in the late 90s through till the present day, more and more US-based stunt people have had the chance to work on foreign locations. So even since I've been based in California, where I moved to in 1989, I have continued to travel and work extensively all over the world. As a side note here, geography was a subject which at school I was absolutely and totally hopeless at. It was only when I started traveling all over the globe to work that I began becoming really interested in the world and its many exciting places and fascinating peoples and cultures. My big note in terms of working internationally is, again, do your research. Find out what is and isn't available in the country you're being asked to go to. One of the huge disadvantages that US-based movie-making professionals have is that they are often spoilt by the simple fact that almost everything and anything that would possibly be needed is available in America. It's part of the greatness of the country, which ends up being the very thing that hinders people's ability to work without certain tools. If someone's making movies in a third world country, they fully understand that many things we take for granted in the US are simply not available. Therefore, these people often become incredibly innovative and resourceful by repurposing equipment and mechanisms designed for other uses and industries. They are forced to think outside the box. Many of these mechanisms and procedures are ultimately extremely inadequate and often even flat out deathly dangerous. However, I have found countless times that these people's innovations can often really work well, and sometimes are ideas that I've expanded on and used in place of expensive equipment and procedures. So my advice on the subject of what you can and can't get in some foreign location and what you will have to ship into the country is this. See movie sequences achieved with the equipment and process you're being offered. Investigate the safety history of these mechanisms and processes and really ask for yourself if they are things that you will be happy and content to work with. Be absolutely satisfied that you are comfortable with the safety aspects as well as the effects they will achieve. The wonderful thing is that almost all the information you'll need to base decisions on is available somewhere on the internet. Do the research and then do more research. You will rarely suffer from knowing too much about anything. How you might use that information is another thing entirely. There are obviously certain situations in which sometimes the possession and certainty, the sharing of private information has led to people ending up buried in some remote grave, but for the most part, knowledge is power. If you are going to have to ship equipment, find out what the restrictions on air travel is. Such things that are too big to get on an aircraft might have to be shipped by sea. Movie prep nowadays rarely has the luxury of being able to ship some huge piece of equipment weeks in advance, so often there is no way of getting it onto a plane. You're probably not going to be able to use it. To this end, we've made pipe ramps, air rams, ratchets, vehicle cannons, roll bars, camera cranes, helicopter mounts, and a whole host of other equipment that can come apart to be reassembled on location. Think also about the cost of shipping some large and heavy piece of equipment on a cargo plane. Think about if you're able to make that piece of equipment on the location. Perhaps this is possible by taking just some vital or complex piece. There have been instances of taking things like remote camera heads from the US, England or Europe, but constructing the crane to mount it on the country you're going to. So think outside the box here. See what other smaller, lighter or more accessible piece of equipment might do the job. When you do your research, also make sure you discover all and any rules or legal restrictions that might be in play in the country you're planning to go to. The list of limitations and restrictions that can be affected by local laws, rules and customs is endless. Obviously, firearms and explosives are far more heavily regulated and restricted in certain countries, but there are also many, many more less obvious limitations. Some Asian countries have engine size limits on motorcycles, so that chase you designed for the hero to ride a 200 mile per hour superbike is now suddenly either not possible or hugely problematic to try and achieve. While you're doing this research, make sure to do some investigation into local customs as well as laws. Again, the list can be endless, but includes things like the stunt woman who's going to be involved in the action is bareheaded with long blowing hair in the wind as she rides a motorcycle. The sequence done in some of the predominantly strictly Muslim countries around the world, I have worked in several, will be problematic to the point of being dangerous because women without their hair covered are a big no-no. This is just one small example, but it goes to illustrate the need to do in-depth research. Another part of the location, local versus imported commodities also extends to personnel. What is the general skill level of local stunt people? Are there any stunt people in the country you're going to? If not, where's the nearest country that you're able to bring some people in from? Are there any restrictions in people from those countries entering in and working in the country you're going to? Do not simply presume you must bring everyone from your home country. While you might and should bring your most talented and personally known specialists from your home country, do not believe absolutely everyone on your team has to come from the same country as you do. I've shot big action sequences all over the world by taking a core group of particular specialists. Perhaps this is a handful of key and extremely skilled drivers or fighters or gymnasts. The important thing is to put together a small group who can cover lots of bases and also take the unique specialists you need. For instance, I almost always take my own stunt car builder mechanic. The reason for this is simple: peace of mind. The man I've taken to several far and remote corners of the world is Bill Flaherty, a guy that can build whatever I need out of whatever he can find in that particular location. I don't have to concern myself with how tough it is to get materials or find workshop space. Somehow, in some often wild and outrageous way, everything I ask for will miraculously turn up on set. This approach and potential outcome is true of a lot of specialists all over the world. There are great horsemen and women in England and Spain, fight and wire rigging guys in China and Hong Kong, incredible car and motorcycle people in America, France and England. The list goes on and on. The point being, there are wonderfully skilled and talented people and many different physical skills all over the world. Find out who they are. The way to do this is, yet again, do research. Chapter 13. Think outside the box. Do we need to see the car crash, or can we arrive at the already crashed car and use the money saved to do something bigger later in the movie? Do research. The internet is great for this. Look at the simplistic form of action. Compare it to tempo, dance. Find out what is real versus what is the movie. Look at a stunt and describe what you're watching. What are you seeing compared to what's really there? For instance, the existence of fear in real violence. Chapter 14. Read your day. Ultimately, the most expensive ingredient you will ever deal with is time. This little chapter is really important for second unit directors. If you're running behind and know an alternative, have a backup plan for everything. Always shoot the must-haves first, no matter what anyone says about light or some other variable. Shoot the material that, without it, the sequence will not work first. This way, if there's an accident, an equipment failure, a location issue, a terrorist attack, anything, you will still have the important part of the sequence. Chapter 15. Break down sequences into bullet points. Example, car crash. How many backup cars budgeted? Do you need a specialist for some particular stunt? How much to prep to make sure everything works safely and effectively? Cars. What are you going to have done to modify and prepare it? How many and what type of safety people are needed? Rehearsals. How much time has been allowed? Rehearsals are the cheapest time spent, so make sure they are made full use of, so that on shoot day, stunts are plug and play. This is very important. Cost of rehearsals will be quickly forgotten if the action on set goes faster than anticipated. Rehearsals are money very well spent. Post-crash. Getting rid of the crash car. Cleaning up the oil on the road. Who will do it? Mistake damage. What happens when the car or the location is damaged? Can you still complete the sequence? What's the backup plan? Extra PAs to lock up when you're doing something big. Do you have enough? Areas which are always under budgeted are transport and communication. Can you really get the people in and out the time you're budgeting for? Working out something like transportation may save a lot. This is money you can use to get something else you really need. A lot of people fail simply because they don't take in the big picture. Make all things your responsibility for a couple of very important reasons. One, because any or all things might suddenly become your responsibility anyway. If and when that happens, you'll be ready to handle it. Two, being in control of it might make it more possible to make something else better out of it. The more you control, the more you can manipulate to get better value for the sequence. Treat most people politely, but as if they will let you down. Why? Because many will. An example here, when I was doing the Amazing Spiderman 2 in New York, we wanted to do huge vehicle chase sequences. Manhattan was incredibly restrictive in terms of what we were really allowed to do, so a friend of mine from childhood, Ray Lipscomb, lived and worked in the city of Rochester in northern New York. He told me about how broke the city was because the Kodak company, who'd been the main employer in the city, was now practically shut down. Their employment force was now a couple hundred of people, while it had previously been employed over 50,000. So in the city was effectively broke. My buddy Ray told me the city looked just like Manhattan at street level. It just didn't have such tall buildings. I went up there and took a look around. At street level, it looked just like Manhattan. Extending buildings upwards in post-production is a relatively economical fix nowadays, so I suggested we shoot there. The issue we faced in Manhattan, in particular, a strictly enforced speed limit of 30 miles an hour, needing to cover with heavy steel trench plate any road surface a vehicle would touch with anything other than its wheels and the obvious traffic restrictions, all these were absolutely non-existent in Rochester. The mayor welcomed us and actually came out to watch some of the more spectacular chase action sequences. We drove through downtown Rochester with 25 police cars chasing the 13,000-pound truck, 13,000-pound tow truck, towing an armoured car. The truck was driven brilliantly by my old friend and long-time working colleague Keith Adams. The armoured car had a driver in it. Another long-time friend and colleague, Tanner Gill. On top of the armoured car were two stunt actors, Dusan Heisker and Andre Runzo, and concealed in the back to steer the specially rigged armoured truck was veteran stuntman and coordinator Gary Davis. This huge convoy blasted through the streets of downtown Rochester at well over 50 miles an hour, using leading actors within the action. This is a very, very important note. A lot of, in my opinion, less bright stunt coordinators put all their time and energy into making the action bigger. While this is not in itself a bad thing, creating something that makes an audience see and feel that the movie's hero is really present within that action is far more important. Why? Because the audience is emotionally invested in the hero character. The crashes and explosions are simply fun things that happen around that character. Ultimately, the audience wants to believe that the person they're following through the movie's story is real, and that they are really doing those fantastic things. Whether it's Jean-Claude Van Damme beating up a gang of bad guys, John Wayne galloping his horse across a western landscape, or Steve McQueen jumping a car along San Francisco streets. The universally essential ingredient is that the audience wants to believe that the hero they're watching on screen is really capable of and is actually performing the action. So always be thinking of ways in which you can have the real actor do something that makes him a true part of an action sequence. There are lots of ways of making this work. For instance, you work out with the ADs 2 shots to put the star in, but that star is 300 miles away shooting on the other unit. How do you make that work? Maybe you save a whole bunch of money elsewhere by cutting something less important, such as 3 cars from a multi-vehicle crash, and now use that saved money to helicopter the star in and out of your second unit shoot day. Now you've really added some star power bang to your second unit shoot. Think outside the box about ways to make the star and action star by making him or her present within the movie's action sequences. Backup plans for when things don't go as wished for. Whenever you're shooting an action sequence, have backup plans. Why? Because things rarely go exactly how you wish they would. These plans can and often should be your own secret backup plans, but have them. So that when this or that disaster happens, you're covered. It's midday and the producer calls you and tells you the studio has told him that the show is over budget and to cut stuff that's not already been done. And by the way, this is a scenario that I've been in many, many times. How do you save the action? Be prepared to negotiate. Trade this action for that action. Be flexible. People that can't quickly and cleverly modify their plan tend to fail. Movie making, ultimately at almost every level, is some form of compromise. A general and universal note here. Absolutely everyone, whoever does their first sequence directing, plans too much work, too many shots. We've all done it, and many of us still do. The way to not do it is to be realistic. Make an ideal version short list, but also do what I call an if hell freezes over version. One that tells the story fast. Chapter 16. Above all else, shoot in order of importance. Don't worry about having to go back over a sequence. Shoot in an order that if you get 3/4 of the day and something terrible happens, you have the sequence. That way, if your leading man finds out he's not that flexible the hard way and puts his back out after lunch, you've already done everything that really featured him and can make a new plan finishing the day with the double. Don't leave that huge setup till the last shot of the day, because the light might just be a little nicer than it was at 3 p.m. Get all the really important stuff done early so you can accept some problems as they happen throughout the day. It's a lot easier to justify something not shot in ideal conditions than explain why you went over and need another day at that location.